These antigen receptors function as observation devices. Things like radar mounted on weapons, infrared cameras, night vision cameras, and sonar serve roles similar to eyes. Using information observed through radar and cameras, they instantly compare it against cloud-connected databases. They determine the enemy's category, strategy, and attack method within an incredibly short time, just 1/1000 of a second. The immune system, the military force that sustains life. Inside our bodies, we are constantly fighting microorganisms and substances entering from outside the body. A world just like science fiction truly exists there. I would like to examine and explain this immune system from a military-style perspective. First of all, I'd like to talk about what immunity actually is. It is described as a collection of mechanisms that protect the body from disease. They recognize and eliminate non-self substances, cancer cells, and abnormal cells. In short, living organisms recognize foreign organisms entering the body. They also detect cells within the body that become abnormal or dangerous, and then they eliminate them. When you think carefully about immunity, you realize it performs advanced functions. I'll explain this later, but the immune system is precise and dynamic. Through information transmission, cells and tissues coordinate in complex ways. Being both precise and dynamic, it's sophisticated yet operates naturally. What does it even mean to be both precise and dynamic? This is only possible because the mechanism is well designed. The immune system can detect pathogens from viruses to parasites. In other words, it handles everything from tiny to large pathogens. It can even distinguish between them. The human body contains more than 60 trillion cells. Those cells determine whether something is beneficial or harmful. Living organisms survive by taking substances in and expelling them. These include oxygen, water, minerals, and many other substances. They also process drugs and various chemical substances. Enzymes in the liver help process and eliminate them. These are low molecular weight substances handled by liver enzymes. The immune system handles larger, more complex substances and pathogens. Pathogens include viruses, bacteria, and more. The immune system exists to eliminate those pathogens. Pathogens are not only living things, snake and bee venom are also toxins. Those are included as well. The immune system handles things that are biologically large or complex. This is technology itself, acquired through evolution. Technology means accumulated techniques over time. Over long periods, many functions evolved. Creating today's immune system, human civilization evolved from fire making to modern IT. Likewise, the immune system functions through accumulated technology.
The story is that it was built up like that, so it's kind of natural selection, right?
Well, that's just my interpretation.
The way you were talking made it sound like it had been built up consciously.
But I can't help feeling that way. The immune system is so complex. I wonder how natural selection created it. It mainly deals with larger pathogens, which can be troublesome. Unlike ordinary substances, they are difficult to control. That is why the immune system exists, to eliminate them. From our perspective, this is incredibly high-tech. How advanced is the human immune system? Think of it as a defense force. Cells are like towns or settlements. Colonies functioning as body cells. That's the framework we'll use moving forward. Imagine a world with 60 trillion towns and settlements. It is said that there are 3 major types of immunity. One type of immunity is innate immunity. These are myeloid lineage cells, including neutrophils and macrophages. These are natural killer cells, the so-called NK cells. Generally, when we say white blood cells, this is what we mean. These are the cells that gobble things up. In terms of a nation, NK cells are a basic defensive force. These NK cells are like patrol cars operated by local police boxes. They are like patrol boats or airborne patrol helicopters. When something enters from outside, they monitor suspicious-looking cells. Basically, if something looks suspicious, they eliminate it. They can make basic threat assessments within ordinary common sense. Scammers are difficult to detect. They can't see through deception. Smooth talkers or professional spies cannot be detected properly. Some people may be good but simply look intimidating. Like quasi-gang organizations, they may be wrongly eliminated, even if they are good people. They look like an evil organization.
There are.
Groups like that do exist, right? Sometimes they eliminate organizations simply because they look suspicious. These are the so-called NK cells, natural killer cells. Next is acquired immunity. The previous one was innate immunity. Acquired immunity has 2 types, B cells and killer T cells. Killer T cells destroy cells carrying matching antigens. These correspond to special police or the military. Unlike NK cells, they possess much stronger attack power. Unlike innate immunity, they operate in organized systems. The natural killer cells from earlier are basically checking nearby targets, then grabbing and consuming suspicious ones. That's roughly how they work. Killer T cells are more like a military force. They move systematically, sharing information efficiently. Killer T cells use shared information. In other words, know-how. Using that know-how, they locate hidden threats or brainwashed cells and eliminate them. Brainwashed cells are dangerous too. Even corrupted cells cannot be identified by appearance alone, but with sufficient know-how, they can still be eliminated. Killer T cells handle threats that innate immunity cannot cover. They respond to toxins, small pathogens, and pathogens hiding inside cells. Things like that. And then there are lymphocytes. Most blood cells end with cell. These immune system cells, which manage information control, are generally called lymphocytes, or types of lymphocytes. These lymphocytes produce antibodies and attack. I'll explain antibodies in more detail later. In military terms, they function like shells or missiles. You can think of antibodies as projectile weapons, or rather, the weapons themselves. To summarize, acquired immunity. It acquires information and adapts. It changes strategy based on acquired knowledge. To summarize the characteristics of acquired immunity. Specificity. It can distinguish pathogens, weapon types, attack attributes, and categories. Diversity. It can defeat virtually any enemy. Its combat capability is overwhelmingly powerful. However, overwhelming numbers or unknown strategies can sometimes exceed its ability to respond. There is also self-tolerance, the ability not to attack oneself. Even in PUBG squads, people accidentally shoot teammates. Things like that can happen. So there is always the risk of friendly fire. Even in this microscopic world, similar mistakes can happen. Unlike NK cells, they do not judge by appearance alone. They make decisions based on information. Therefore, they generally do not attack allies by mistake. There are systems for enemy lists and organized information sharing. Pretty high-tech, isn't it? Next is immune memory. The same defense won't work twice. Or maybe it's better to say the same defense. Once immune cells engage a pathogen in battle, they record battle data and pathogen identification data. They analyze enemy information, record strategies and attack methods, then build systems to share that information. Using that know-how and knowledge base, they can instantly wipe out the enemy.
What is this? Databases and all that?
Well, I added that part myself, but it's basically similar. They retain enemy data. I'll explain it later, but it's roughly the same idea. And honestly, it's surprisingly modern. I'd also like to explain how pathogens are identified. Pathogenic substances that trigger immune responses are called antigens. Killer T cells and B cells display antigen receptors on their surfaces. They basically have sensor-like structures. These antigen receptors act as observation devices. Like radar, infrared cameras, night vision cameras, or sonar, they function like eyes. Using information gathered through radar and cameras, they instantly compare it against cloud-based databases. Then they identify enemy categories, strategies, and attack methods within an incredibly short time. Roughly 1/1000 of a second. Well, 1/1000 of a second isn't literally true, but they do something close to that. I just thought this explanation was easier to grasp. Right, so what actually plays the role of radar and surveillance systems? Things like dendritic cells and macrophages, amoeba-like cells that constantly engulf things. They continuously engulf foreign substances. These dendritic cells capture pathogens, toxic proteins, or viruses. Then they carry them to places called lymph nodes. Inside the lymph nodes, dendritic cells pass pathogen information to cells called helper T cells. That's how information exchange occurs. There are apparently 3 types of T cells: killer T cells, helper T cells, and regulatory T cells. Each has its own role, and killer T cells receive antigen information from dendritic cells. They attach themselves to virus-infected cells or cancer cells and directly carry out their elimination. Once they receive information, killer T cells rush out and fight on their own. They function like special forces. Helper T cells receive antigen information about foreign substances from dendritic cells and macrophages. They produce immune-activating substances called cytokines and formulate attack strategies while issuing commands. They are commanders, acting like command centers. Although command center sounds singular, the body is actually filled with command centers. They function more like distributed computing systems. There are many command centers, but they think and operate collectively. Helper T cells mainly use cytokines, more like communication methods or protocols. They function as a system for transmitting information. They release large amounts of cytokines, like emergency alert signals. At the same time, they formulate attack strategies and issue commands. Cytokines are information-transmitting substances that form the core of the immune information system. Cytokines send instructions like send reinforcements, attack now, or hold position for now. They can even order cells to self-destruct, issuing many kinds of biological commands. Therefore, artificially introducing cytokines into the body can temporarily enhance immune function. Artificial cytokines can activate immunity and rapidly create resistance against viruses and similar threats. Apparently, this is also used in cancer treatment. It is known as cytokine therapy. It is considered a type of immunotherapy. Next are regulatory T cells. They suppress killer T cells, so they do not excessively attack normal cells. They also function to bring immune responses to an end. Killer T cells can sometimes target normal cells as well. In a sense, they can even eliminate traitors or corrupt allies when necessary. That is the level of authority killer T cells possess. Even if an aircraft carrier were brainwashed by aliens, T cells would sink the entire aircraft carrier. They are that ruthless. In emergencies, that decisiveness is extremely meaningful, but at the same time, it also carries danger. That is why regulatory T cells exist. Like a review board or oversight committee, prosecutors hold tremendous authority, so review commissions exist to restrain that power. They objectively assess the battle, reduce attack intensity, and order overheated units to retreat. Those are the kinds of powers held by regulatory T cells. Next, I'd like to explain B cells. Killer T cells were the ones that directly attack infected cells, right? By contrast, B cells are immune cells that produce antibodies called glycoproteins. Glycoprotein molecules are relatively simple, though proteins themselves are still complex. At the atomic level, they are complicated, but they create many different glycoprotein forms. Those glycoproteins are called antibodies. These bind to specific molecules such as proteins and antigens. It could be a virus fragment or the virus itself. They recognize and attach themselves to foreign molecules that function as antigens. Through these antibodies, foreign enemies become neutralized. The weapons humans use work similarly. Machines and mechanisms cannot adapt flexibly on their own. Whether firing bullets or missiles, you cannot simply launch them randomly. You load ammunition, take aim, and pull the trigger. Then the gunpowder explodes. And only then does the weapon function properly. If even one process is disrupted, the weapon can no longer fire. Antibodies work in a similar way. They can alter things like bullet size or gunpowder amounts. Even ordinary actions depend on complex procedures. That complexity becomes especially obvious in the microscopic world. If something attaches perfectly to a pathogen, that pathogen can no longer function properly. In short, it loses the ability to attack. When B cells receive attack orders from helper T cells, the commanders, they receive strategic information about the enemy and immediately differentiate into plasma cells. They transform, then they begin producing antibodies. It's like a combat unit suddenly transforming into a massive production factory. That's the image you should imagine. The antibodies released by B cells become something like a minefield for enemies. Personally, I imagine antibodies more like rapidly firing railguns. In reality, they scatter huge numbers of antibodies, and anything caught by them stops functioning. That is one way they neutralize threats. Antibodies also block enemy movement and weapons, while simultaneously marking targets as enemies. Immune cells can instantly recognize that one is hostile. Then immune cells rush in immediately. It's like those paint marker balls that burst and stain targets. Antibodies also function as identification markers. When you picture it that way, it becomes an incredibly powerful defense system. That is the role of antibodies. Foreign enemies neutralized in this way are ultimately consumed by T cells or NK cells. Next, I'd like to talk about immune memory. As mentioned earlier, immune memory functions like a database system. B cells become plasma cells and produce antibodies at the same time, while some remain behind as memory cells among the B cells. Some become stored knowledge, like part of a computer system. Those memory-type B cells record and preserve data. That is the mechanism of immune memory. The reason the same attack no longer works is because immunity can remember it. But apparently, a single B cell can remember only one thing. It's like saying, I'll store this antibody data, but each memory B cell can retain only one antibody pattern. In military terms, commands come down from the commander, and specialized weapons are manufactured against the enemy. It's like a near-future Aegis destroyer. Inside this B cell Aegis ship, advanced machine tools like 3D printers are installed. Using strategic information stored on the cloud, the optimal weapon design is calculated automatically. Then machine systems manufacture and deploy weapons specialized for that enemy. Those specialized weapons track and destroy the enemy reliably. It's like producing perfectly tracking weapons and firing them rapidly in succession. That's the image I want you to picture. At the same time, the newly created weapon data is sent through the cloud network, allowing specialized weapons to be produced immediately. That's essentially modern high-tech warfare itself. Though the entire fleet part is slightly exaggerated, in reality it's more like a single specialized battalion. Not every unit can focus on one enemy. The human body is constantly fighting every possible threat at the same time. So only certain battalions respond to specific enemies. The cloud network analogy wasn't just for sounding cool, though admittedly, that's part of it too. Enemy data is not managed in one central location. The brain itself doesn't store antibody blueprints. Instead, some B cells become memory units and manage information distributively, similar to distributed computing systems. Memory B cells throughout the body manage strategic data in parallel. So even if one command center is destroyed, the system continues functioning. That matches the robustness of cloud and distributed computing systems. In other words, the body builds the same kind of robust architecture. However, even B cells are not completely invincible. Some enemies periodically alter the mechanisms of their weapons. In Star Trek terms, it's like a multi-phase shield. They constantly shift frequencies and phases, causing attacks to stop working. As the shield phase changes, existing attacks become ineffective. Enemies capable of doing that are extremely troublesome. The specialized weapons created against them suddenly become completely useless. At that point, only the NK cells remain effective. NK cells can still attack anything that simply appears dangerous. But intelligent enemies can deceive them or resist attacks entirely. That means being caught off guard. It's also a downside of advanced technology. Viruses and cancer closely resemble high-tech warfare. The entire situation can reverse very quickly.
When you said just now that B cells are useful but not almighty, do you mean cancer and things like that?
That's what it means. Things like HIV exploit the blind spots of high technology. HIV causes AIDS, and even though antibodies are produced, attacks fail. This is apparently called ADE, or antibody-dependent enhancement. You think antibodies neutralize the threat, but immune cells absorb it while it remains infectious. As a result, secondary infection occurs. When antibodies attack the enemy, other white blood cells come to consume it. Thinking it was neutralized, they consume it and become infected themselves. Because in reality, it was never neutralized. Since things are not going as intended, a cytokine storm may also occur. This is what's called immune runaway. The body ends up deploying far too many weapons against the target. Signals continue spreading, ordering them to attack. Even highly capable immune molecules damage normal cells when massively overproduced. And these massive movements of weapons and units all travel through blood vessels. As a result, the blood vessels themselves become heavily congested. As the battle intensifies, the body's own systems, even its economy, begin collapsing. Roads become unusable from congestion, and infrastructure-like systems also begin to fail. The human body also has systems, equivalent to infrastructure like electricity and gas. Oxygen can no longer circulate properly, and nutrients stop reaching tissues. As a result, the body's internal factories stop producing. Their functions gradually shut down. This develops into excessive inflammation and causes multiple organ failure. When multiple organ failure occurs, various organs begin weakening, either gradually or all at once. The body loses its defenses, allowing many kinds of aliens to invade at once. Enemies invade places that have weakened and lost defensive power. So cytokine storms are said to occur because antibody production becomes insufficient. In other words, the enemy was only partially defeated. It also becomes more likely when nutritional conditions are poor. So poor nutrition itself is a considerable risk factor. HIV can also infect T cells, the immune system's command centers. Eventually, the immune system weakens after losing its commanders. What I once heard was that HIV takes over the helper T cells that function as commanders. Though comparatively speaking, that explanation may not be entirely correct. I've also heard there are no cells that directly attack helper T cells. But for now, the accepted explanation is that HIV infects helper T cells themselves, causing the immune system to weaken after losing its commanders. As a result, the body develops immunodeficiency. These attack methods closely resemble high-tech warfare. They are essentially forms of information warfare, similar to stealth technology or hacking. No matter how powerful the weapons are, or how advanced the immune cells producing them may be, if the operators or software controlling them are compromised, there is little they can do. Viruses such as HIV almost feel like they bribe the commanders. They begin by throwing the military command system into confusion. They interfere with information transmission through jamming, while also concealing themselves from detection. Cancer cells are especially efficient at carrying out these kinds of tactics. As for cancer, Recently, or a little while ago, there was something called immune checkpoint inhibition therapy. In short, cancer keeps proliferating because immune cells have something like an immune checkpoint button. This function suppresses immunity itself, and cancer sends false signals through the immune information network. It spreads disinformation telling immunity to stop, allowing cancer to multiply during that time. This is the basic mechanism of cancer. Cancer is somewhat unique. In other words, it uses different kinds of information against the military, or manipulates the information network itself to stop the system indirectly. There may actually be physical contact between cells, but fundamentally that is the characteristic it has. From here, I'd like to discuss immunity from a defense perspective. If we view the immune system as defense, it can be divided into three major barriers. The first is a mechanical barrier. Things like skin and eggshells are examples of mechanical barriers. They form the first defensive line against infection. Most infectious agents are physically blocked by the skin. In Earth defense terms, this is like fighting in the atmosphere. The atmosphere itself acts as a physical barrier. Interceptor missiles and satellite-based shields would correspond to this. In the future, we might imagine tractor beams removing threats one by one. In humans, that role is played by sneezing, tears, and mucus. These mechanically expel pathogens and other foreign substances. Next, there is the chemical barrier. Human skin is actually kept mildly acidic. Tears, saliva, and breast milk contain antibacterial enzymes. These substances create chemical defensive effects. They use chemically toxic substances to keep foreign enemies out. Chemical barriers are especially important for things entering through the mouth. Food passes through the esophagus, stomach, and intestines before excretion. For living organisms, this area carries considerable risk. Strictly speaking, things entering the mouth are not yet inside the body, but the inside of that passage is still a highly risky zone. It's like creating dejima to minimize the risks of trade. During isolation, Japan used dejima to reduce infection and foreign influence. The inside of the mouth is somewhat similar to that system. Even trading through dejima still means allowing things into the country. Therefore, anything entering through the mouth must be heavily monitored. Compared with skin, the environment there is extremely harsh. That's what the inside of the mouth is like. Bad aliens are placed under strict surveillance there. If they do anything suspicious, it's like being sprayed with hydrochloric acid. Next, there is the biological barrier. Interestingly, about 5% of our bodies is not actually us. That 5% consists of bacteria, parasites, viruses, and other organisms. It's fair to say our bodies are partly made together with them. These symbiotic aliens occupy places where harmful aliens could live. Because friendly aliens already live there, other aliens cannot settle there. That is the idea behind the biological barrier. The most important thing in a barrier is the ability to identify targets. The same applies to both attack and defense. The most essential function in defense is identification itself. Cells have receptors, which act as recognition devices. They function similarly to barcodes or facial recognition systems. Using them, cells distinguish allies from foreign enemies. No matter how advanced authentication becomes, it can never be completely perfect. So our immune system cannot be perfect either. Both human society and the microscopic immune world ultimately face the same kinds of problems.
To say it in one phrase, it comes down to how well made it is. But
Right.
we've settled all kinds of things like that up to now. Saying, wow, it's so well made.
Yeah.
This really is, like, I can't help but feel the power of God,
That's basically what it comes down to.
right?
Talking about these details is almost like debating whether the moon is a celestial body.
Yeah, exactly. Like saying that a thing in E. coli this big couldn't possibly have come about through natural selection.
It's around that sort of level.
It's the same story, isn't it?
Earlier, we discussed how antibodies can be produced in huge varieties. As for how long they are stored, people often say around 10 years. Apparently, it depends on the specific case. My guess is that even if something is memorized, there may be no inheritance system for that memory. It's like storing data on a hard drive that fails after about 3 years. Normally, you would back it up elsewhere beforehand. I don't think the immune system has that kind of function. So the duration may depend on how many memory cells remain. At most, perhaps around 10 or 20 years. That's why inactivated vaccines do not create strong immune memory. So they require repeated shots, because only a small amount is remembered. We imagine memories being neatly stored somewhere, but they are actually recorded through distributed computing. If only 5 or 10 records remain, they may be forgotten within days.
It's well made. From a human perspective, in the sense of protecting humans, there is a sense that it is well made. But when I think about whether God designed this, something with humans at the center, there are bad guys that show up sometimes, like COVID and so on. I end up wondering how I should interpret those.
At least from that perspective. Almost all animals have similar functions.
Those cause all kinds of malfunctions, don't they? In various senses, diseases and things. Like, is that a design flaw? Couldn't it have been designed properly so that it wouldn't happen?
I see. If that were true, then design mistakes would be impossible. This really resembles a natural selection system. The system is built on coexistence and mutual conflict.
It's not as if humans are the main subject or anything.
That's not exactly how it works.
It's a question of why it makes things that way, isn't it?
That's true. Maybe that is the easiest system to maintain. If you take that idea further, doesn't life itself become unnecessary? Fighting foreign enemies and preserving the self are basic to life. If there were no enemies at all, there would be no reason to exist. There would be no need to struggle for survival. Sorry, this became rather complicated. There are drugs too, pharmaceuticals. These drugs are designed to work with our immune system. Among medicines for infectious diseases, some famous examples already exist. One example is a drug that inhibits messenger RNA activity. Viruses need gene transcription in order to multiply. So when viruses replicate themselves, they require transcription RNA. The RNA template fits into a certain shape, and the opposite side is then formed. This process is driven by transcription RNA and reverse transcriptase enzymes. There are drugs that inhibit this RNA transcription function. These drugs enter cells and provide a bit of assistance there. And remember the checkpoint mentioned earlier? Immune cells have something like a stop button. Some things can press that stop button mechanism. So there are drugs that inhibit the inhibition itself. Those kinds of medicines now exist to counter complex foreign enemies. On the other hand, human immunity also has limits. What that means is, for example, humans are structured to accept a certain level of pathogens as a system. People often say death is unavoidable, or that viruses eventually kill their hosts. But actually, even E. coli and similar organisms can kill us. What I wanted to say is that we cannot escape death. As individuals, we cannot avoid it. Groups may survive, but individuals cannot. We can now create clones from somatic cells, and even cut and paste genes, right? So I think this field will probably advance rapidly in the near future.
Within the idea that humans are not the main thing. Humans make drugs and systems and things, which I think came up just now, and it feels like we're resisting.
We call things artificial, but what humans do is also part of nature. So in a sense, it raises the question of what nature really is. In our perception, there is us and then there is nature. But the word nature means something that occurs spontaneously. So there is actually a slight gap between our image of nature and its true concept. From an outside perspective, humans themselves are also nature, even if from our own perspective, we appear artificial.
Dogs and cats look at us, and even though we're doing incredibly chemical things, it's nature.
Yes, humans are nature too. To a cat, humans are simply part of nature. Lately, I've been thinking we may need to reconsider our interpretation of nature. Recently, I often feel I was taught or assumed myself that nature meant something different. Maybe it's a kind of brainwashing.
Nature does not exist.
Who was that person again? The environmental activist?
The nature person?
That girl who says she can see carbon dioxide.
Ah, Greta.
Greta. It might become something like Greta and nature.
Nature does not exist.
No, wait a second. This is actually important when discussing the immune system.